Okay, so we will start. Well, as I have already said, my Directorate-General for Economic Activities as a set of the mission and the set of duties that enable it to perform the function of Portuguese National Contact Point for responsible business conduct. If you want, you may consult this legislation with our responsibilities that link the activity of the Directorate-General with the activity of the National Contact Point. So as I've already said, we are National Contact Point for responsible business conduct. And responsible business conduct, according with the OECD, sets the expectation that all companies, regardless of their legal status, size, ownership, or sector, avoid and address the negative impacts of their operations while contributing to sustainable development in the countries where they operate. In a holistic approach, responsible business conduct can thus be understood as the duty of a company to recognize its impacts, positive and negative, on society, prevent, manage, mitigate, and/or repair negative impacts throughout its value chain, and contribute positively to sustainable development in the countries where it operates. The OECD identifies 8 objectives for responsible business conduct. One of them is the human rights, as expressed in the International Bill of Human Rights. The other objective is the labor rights, according with the definitions of the ELO. So the objectives of the OECD are totally aligned with other international instruments. For the environment, it is important to have in attention that the OECD is aligned with the Paris Agreement. Then there is the objective related with the minorities, that refers to certain categories of the society that need to be integrated in the economy through specific policies. There is another objective that is the disabilities, refer to people with disabilities, those who have physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on his or her ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. Another very important objective is the unemployment, refers to long-term unemployed people who have been unemployed for more than 12 months. The gender refers to incorporating gender elements in the public procurement policy-making cycle and in the procurement process. And at last, is the integrity, refers to the consistent alignment of and adherence to shared ethical values, principles, and norms for upholding and prioritizing the public interest over private interest in the public sector. Integrity breach includes corruption, fraud, bribery, and tax evasion. So for enterprise that work at a lot of regions in the world, this is a very important objective, because not the legal framework is different in different regions of our planet. So it is very important. There is, as you certainly know, there is no RBC without due diligence. Due diligence is the operational arm of RBC, the process by which theoretical strategies are put in practice. Due diligence is a process for companies to identify and respond to negative impacts, real and potential, related to their operations and along their supply chain. As you can see in this diagram, the responsible business conduct, it's operation that never ends. So it is cycling. It is we have to be to get better our operations. We have to analyze always analyze our operations, because in some time our operations may be good, but without changes of the context where we operate, that operations may start to have some adverse impacts. So it is important to evaluate every time, and the due diligence is the part of the RBC that enables these continuous evaluations and to implement the activities that are needed to prevent or resolve some of our adverse impacts. This is very, very important. Due diligence never ends. There is the OECD is working a lot for the RBC to change the chief of that RBC is not only a matter of the enterprise, it is also a matter of the governments. So if the governments create an environment comfortable for the enterprise to adopt RBC, probably enterprise will implement a political and management system that integrates RBC. So there is a lot of strategies for the governments can support the enterprise on this objective. One of that strategies passed by the public procurement, when the governments are not only governments, but they are also buyers, and go to the market to search what is more suitable or not. And if the governments send to the enterprise the signal that the price is not the only factor that is important, but also how that product is put on the market, it is very important, because the most important is that the governments lead by the example. It is the best practice. There is other strategies like the national action plans, like how can I say this, to comply with all the governmental areas for in their own legislations, to integrate RBC practice and due diligence practice also. So the OECD has a lot of work on this in the recent years. And I think that now I will pass the presentation for my colleague Pedro Marques. Thank you.
Yes. Hello and good morning, everyone. So before starting, I tend to speak a little bit fast. So if I'm speaking too fast, say it. And I also apologize if you hear a dog barking. Sometimes my dog tends to get a little bit crazy by the morning. So we will be mainly talking about two instruments, which is the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct, And also I'll speak briefly about the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct. But as you are probably aware, these are not the only international instruments relevant to the promotion of RBC. As you also know, we were talking briefly before the session starts. The OECD has in 2023 been updated after more than 10 years using the last version of 2011. One of the things that we are now promoting across our targets. It's that even though the title of the OECD's specifically refers to multinational enterprises, there is a common expectation that all companies, independent of their size, have the same expectations of complying with the guidelines. And even though we may recognize that there might be some limitations due to the size of small and medium enterprises, they are encouraged to comply with the guidelines as best as they can. So to the update process, there has been a targeted update, which means there was not a completely rewrite of the guidelines in themselves. I would just like to tell you that this update was conducted by 51 adherent countries to the OECD declaration. This updated benefited from some close involvement of some of institutional stakeholders, namely Business at OECD, the TUAC, the Trade Union Advisory Committee on the OECD, and the OECD Watch. What else? I think I will pass directly to the guidelines themselves. So this is actually made by 3 parts. So the declaration on international investment and multinational enterprises, which is basically the commitment that adherent governments are making when they are adhering to the guidelines. The second part, which is the core of the guidelines themselves, and that actually shares the same name with the whole instrument, which is the text and commentaries for which one of the 11 chapters that I will speak briefly of. And the third part, which is the implementation procedures of the OECD guidelines, meaning the procedures that the NCPs are expected to implement according to the guidelines themselves. So before the 11 chapters, the guidelines have a preface that sets out the overall context in which the guidelines operate and describes the role of the guidelines in promoting RBC. You will see across the following slides, you will find out some main changes that were made out to this new version of guidelines. I was not planning to dive too deeply on these changes, but I understood that this perhaps could be the focus of some students. So in case you have any questions about it, feel free to ask either during my intervention or by the end of the session. As we said before, these slides will be shared with you, and we are also available to reply to any of your questions by email if you don't have find any questions now but want to contact us later. Feel free to do so. So the first 2 chapters. The first chapter talks about concepts and principles. So it sets out the nature of the guidelines themselves, the potential scope of application, and the relation with the guidelines and the domestic law, and avenues for also promoting the implementation of the recommendation to enterprises. The second chapter focuses on general policies, which means that it establishes common principles that underline specific recommendations of the subsequent chapters, including that business should always conduct risk-based due diligence to assess and address adverse impacts associated with their operations, products, and services on the matters covered by the guidelines. The third chapter, which outlines recommendations for enterprises related to the disclosure of material information and the disclosure of RBC information, even where this information might not be considered material. The fourth chapter, which is aligned with the business responsibility to respect human rights, as established in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, including that enterprises should always conduct due diligence to avoid causing, contributing to, or being directly linked to adverse human rights impacts. The fifth chapter that recommends that enterprises respect the ILO fundamental principles and rights at work, namely the ILO core conventions, as well as a range of other principles related to industrial relations, worker training, and adequate wages and working conditions. The sixth chapter, which sets out the expectations that enterprises should conduct due diligence to assess and address adverse environmental impacts associated with their operations, products, services, including in relation with climate change and biodiversity. I must say that this was also one of the chapters that had the biggest interventions, and up to this point, this chapter is now aligned with the Paris Agreement. The seventh chapter, which sets out the expectation that enterprises shall not engage in any act of bribery or other forms of corruption, and this applies to both supply and demand of corruption by the enterprises, and to interactions with both public officials and with employees of other enterprises. The eighth chapter that calls on enterprises to act in accordance with fair business, marketing, and advertising practices, and that their goods and services will not adversely impact consumers. The ninth chapter, which sets out the expectations that enterprises should conduct due diligence to assess and address adverse impacts associated with the development, financing, sale, licensing, trade, and use of technology, including gathering and using data, as well as scientific research and innovation. As you can imagine, this was also one of the chapters that suffered most alterations. Even though that the name of the chapter was only Science and Technology, right now it changed to Science, Technology, and Innovation. The same happened as well for combating bribery and other forms of the corruption. So the titles changed a little bit, but the spirit of the chapter, it's still the same. The 10th chapter calls on domestic and multinational enterprises to carry out their activities in a manner consistent with the applicable competition laws and regulations, taking into account the competition laws of all jurisdictions in which the activities may have anti-competitive effects. Okay, and that was the message from Laura. And the last chapter, the 11th chapter, calls on enterprises to comply with both the letter and spirit of tax laws and regulations of the countries in which they operate and make timely tax payments. This concludes the thematic chapters of the OECD guidelines. But as I also told you before, besides the OECD guidelines, OECD also has developed transversal guidance for due diligence called the OECD Due Diligence Guidance for RBC, for Responsible Business Conduct, as well as a set of other sectoral guides that address specific issues that arise on certain sectors with a high level impact in fields covered by the guidelines, such as human rights, environment, employment, and industrial relations, corruption, and consumer interests. This concludes my part. We are now passing to national contact points, and it's Pedro time.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So following the presentation made by Lydia and Pedro, I will address the topic of national contact points, shortly NCPs. Next slide, please. Well, national contact points for responsible business conduct are agencies established by adherent governments. They have a double mandate. Firstly, to promote the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises and related due diligence guidance. Secondly, to handle cases which are referred to as specific instances and constitute a non-judicial grievance mechanism. All the 51 adherent governments to the guidelines have the legal obligation to set up an NCP. The guidelines remain the only international instrument on responsible business conduct that includes a national implementation mechanism, the NCPs. So regarding this double mandate, there are the promotional activities that include having an updated website, implementing trainings, workshops, and events, and also for instance, the development of information materials such as flyers. The other part of the mandate has a grievance mechanism. I should point out that it's a non-judicial one. This is very important. This complaint mechanism may be used by interested parties, such as workers representatives, civil society representatives, among others, that understand that some enterprises might have not observed the guidelines. In this context, a complaint may be presented, and it is called a specific instance. As a curiosity, so far, around 650 specific instances have been handled by the NCP network since the year 2000. These cases relate to over 100 countries and territories. So in addition to this double mandate, there are two responsibilities that NCPs may have, if we can call them responsibilities. They can also provide support to their government's efforts in the development, implementation, and coherence of public policies to promote RBC. And lastly, in this role, NCPs may provide data and expertise with a view to legislate on due diligence or play a role in developing a national action plan on RBC or on business and human rights. Now, regarding the mandate and authority on the right-hand side of the slide, the OECD guidelines, having as a reference the non-judicial mechanism that NCPs offer, empowers their authority to deliver its mandate through the addition of provisions, such as the following ones. First provision, recommend that NCPs make recommendations where no agreement was reached by the parties. Second type of provision, recommend that NCPs follow up on the implementation of recommendations, or, if any, the agreement reached by the parties and publish a follow-up statement. Third type of provision, giving NCPs the possibility to set out their views in its final statement on whether the enterprise observed the guidelines, and to inform relevant government agencies of the good faith engagement or absence thereof of the parties where appropriate. Next slide, please. In this slide, you can see a short video, a 3-minute video, a summary of the NCP's contribution to RBC, in the words of NCP coordinator of the OECD Center for RBC, Nicolas Haché.
In many places of the world, we see that responsible business conduct continues to move up the policy agenda. Many governments have adopted strong legislations in the areas of human rights, labor relations, environment, and corruption. There has also been a recent trend for governments to adopt legislations requiring certain companies to conduct due diligence. This increased focus on RBC and related areas can be further seen on the EU level, with the proposal for a directive on corporate sustainability due diligence, which is progressing at a fast pace. At enterprise level, we also see increases in the uptake of RBC, as companies realize that by adopting better sustainability practices, they will become more resilient in times of crisis. To take a recent example, research conducted by the OECD has shown that enterprises with more responsible and sustainable practices such as policies to limit environmental impacts, were more resilient in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic and were able to bounce back better than their less sustainable counterparts. With this increasing interest in RBC, both on the part of governments and enterprises, the NCP mechanism is uniquely positioned to support such initiatives. So let me say a few words about the unique contribution that the NCP system can make to RBC. I will first point out that in a context of interconnected international standards on responsible business conduct, NCPs are unique. They are the only implementation mechanism that is attached to an international standard on responsible business conduct. Under their mandate, NCPs play a critical role in ensuring that expectations from businesses under the guidelines are met. They have developed a broad and far-reaching set of tools to promote the guidelines. They've led to positive changes through their work on remedy and contributed to public policies and government decisions for a policy environment enabling implementation of RBC. And part of what makes NCP successful is their flexibility in handling complaints. Specific instances, as we call such complaints, are not legal cases, and NCPs are not judicial bodies. Dispute resolution through NCPs is intended to be consensual. NCPs focus on identifying constructive solutions and facilitating mutual agreement between parties. NCPs are also flexible with regards to jurisdiction. They can consider issues that arise outside of the country they are based in and can also make decisions on which NCP should lead on a case. In that sense, NCPs are often available where other mechanisms are not.
Next slide, please. So regarding the NCP structure, firstly, I should say that there are different structures around the world. This is just a type of structure. It's called an interagency one. So you already heard about DGAE, Direção-Geral das Atividades Económicas. So I won't speak about it. Regarding the ICEP Portugal Global, which is the other organism or entity that is a part of the NCP structure, it is an agency that attracts foreign direct investment to Portugal, but also helps national companies to foster its business throughout the world. So both establish the link, a connection between each other. There is, as you can see, a coordination team, which corresponds to the top management. It's like a steering committee. And then there is the technical secretariat, to which we all three belong. And it's the operational side. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we can see the specific instance treatment framework. It's vertical, so I have it horizontally. I will read it for you. Step 0, submission and analysis. So complaints are submitted. The NCP coordinates with other NCPs as needed. Afterwards, step 1, initial assessment. The NCP assesses whether the issues identified required further analysis. And there is a 3-month deadline between step 0 and step 1. Step 2, good offices. This is conciliation and or mediation. Meetings take place with the aim of helping the parties reach an agreement on the issues raised. There is a 6-month deadline for the good offices procedure. Step 3, conclusion. This corresponds to the drafting and publication of the NCP output, and there is a 3 months deadline for this step. So in the end, we are talking about a 12 months process. Nevertheless, there is a fourth step called follow-up, where the NCP monitors the implementation of the agreement and or its recommendations. And this follow-up is made after the standard 12 months period. So in terms of procedure, after reading this horizontally, we can have the following situations. Situation number 1, a complaint is submitted, but no grounds are found to give it continuity after the initial assessment. In such a case, a final statement is issued by the NCP. Second type of situation, a complaint is submitted and has grounds to have continuity after the initial assessment. The good offices step is performed, and there are 2 situations after this. Situation 2.1, if there is no agreement after the good offices or within the good offices procedure, has a conclusion, a final statement is issued. Conversely, if there is agreement, has a conclusion, a report is issued. Third type of procedure, in the end, there is always the possibility, despite what happens, to have a follow-up reporting. So next slide, please. This is an image from our website where you can go there and find extra content and also this information we have been telling you about. You are invited to do so. And next slide, please. We thank you all for the attention and your interest in this subject. And as an extra, we have had a peer review recently, and we would like to, through Lydia initially, to talk about it, the key findings and the recommendations made by the reviewers. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. So to finalize, I would like to inform that the year of 2024 will be a challenging year for our NCP. As Pedro has already said, the Portuguese NCP was subjected to a peer review exercise on May 2023, promoted by OECD, resulting on a set of recommendations that will be part of Portuguese peer review NCP report. This report is going to be published by OECD probably in the middle of the next month. We will also publish it in our website and inform about it in our semi-annual newsletter, which will be launched for the very first time next month. The recommendations presented by OECD shall be implemented at its best during 2024, preferably until November 2024, when we have to do the follow-up with OECD. A side note, the 2023 revision of the guidelines calls for peer review exercise to be carried out every 5 years. This is settled in the second part of the document of the guidelines. So returning to the OECD recommendations for Portuguese NCP, they are divided in institutional arrangements, promotional activities, and specific instances. There are 3 recommendations on institutional arrangements. The first recommendation is the 2 NCP secretariat teams working both at DGAE and ICEP should have access to sufficient budget and human resources to fulfill its responsibilities relating to promotion and handling specific instances. The second recommendation, the NCP should consider incorporating more entities into its interagency structure or via an interagency advisory body to address real or perceived concerns of impartiality, increase access to expertise, and enhance stakeholder engagement. The third recommendation, NCP structure and functions would be formalized in a legal instrument. This could improve the authority of the NCP, support communication around the NCP, and facilitate engagement with other actors, including other parts of government. Now, for the recommendations on promotional activities, I pass the word to my colleague Pedro Marques.
Thank you, Lydia. So we also have 3 recommendations on promotional activities. The first one is that our NCP should continue increasing the promotional efforts in line with the recent improvements throughout this year. In this case, the relationship with stakeholders should be leveraged to enhance further promotion, for example, by partnering with multiplier organizations and the Southern European NCP network to increase promotion, while considering the staff and financial resources constraint that we also talked before. The NCP should work to foster relationships with relevant stakeholders, paying particular attention to enhancing the relationships with stakeholders from trade union and civil society. Work could include, for instance, the stakeholder mapping to identify priority connections and strategize the promotion. And finally, the NCP should work to promote the guidelines and the OECD recommendation on the role of the government in promoting RBC to other parts of government, particularly those in other key ministries, such as the Ministry of Labor and Environment. Also, an expanded interagency NCP structure or advisory body should be instrumental in this regard. And on this aspect, we already spoken briefly about this recommendation on Lydia's presentation and the beginning of the session, but we are also developing the Portuguese translation for this recommendation, and we will also be issuing, probably by the next month, friendly flyer, so an overview of this recommendation, both in Portuguese and English, in a 4-page flyer, so to make it more friendly and more approachable, not just for other parts of the government, but for all interested parties, all the stakeholders. And now for the recommendations on specific instances, I pass the word to Pedro Pinheiro.
Thank you, Pedro. So regarding the recommendations on specific instances, we had 2. The first one was to revise our rules of procedure to ensure that they are easily understood by potential submitters of specific instances. So we should as well align them with the last revision of the guidelines as well. Finally, and this is something we intend to do in January. Finally, the NCP should work to build expertise relating to possible incoming specific instances, including building technical and mediation-related skills within the NCP. So there was already a first step that was made by my 2 colleagues. They participated in an online training on mediation, but more is required and advisable. Thank you.
I think with this, we concluded our presentation.
Thanks so much to Lydia, Pedro, and Pedro for the presentation, and it's great to see the progress and the increase of promotional activities also of the NCP, including, for instance, this session with the students. And now I think I will open the floor for questions from our researchers. So maybe you can raise your hands, or if you want to write it on the chat. Rita, Rodrigo, Arnau.
As
Anyone?
we said before as well, if you feel that the questions may arise later, you should always feel comfortable to contact us through our functional email at pcn.portugal@gai.gov.pt. Just to disclose that.
Yeah, in the meantime, maybe I can ask you a question and maybe they can think about any other questions. So about we were talking about multinational enterprises, but what's the role of the NCP in relation to promoting responsible business conduct with small and medium enterprises? Because I think this is also one of the focus in Portugal, because the majority of companies are small and medium enterprises. And then another question, it's about whether the NCP is in touch with other NCPs from the network, even like from Europe, from the European Union, in terms of sharing good practices, or if it is something you also envisage to do in the future.
Okay, so regarding the promotion of the OECD guidelines with SMEs, we are working on that, especially through our other entity that constitutes the NCP, that is ICEP. So ICEP is the main contact point of the NCP for the enterprises. And next month, there will be a webinar launched by ICEP, where we will participate. Issued especially for enterprise, among them for the SMEs, of course. And but we, as in our activity, we also contact with the representative on enterprise, and the representative of enterprise are very concerned with the increasing of obligations for the enterprise regarding RBC, especially the SMEs, because they have less resources, so they already face a lot of challenge due to the economic context that we are living now, and the political context also. So they are very concerned, and we are always in contact with them. We are always informing about what we are doing on RBC, what are the best way for them to face this new challenge, and we try to explain them that RBC is not only obligations, and it is also a very positive factor for their activity, because it enables them to distinguish from their concurrencia for their other enterprises.
Competition, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Pedro. For the competition in a positive way. So we try to inform them about what RBC represents from the point of view of the obligations, but also as a positive competitive factor for the distinguish from the competition of the other enterprises. We are trying to do this work.
Lydia, if you don't mind for me to just add something. So not just specifically to the small and medium enterprises, but also on the matters of promotional activities, what we are planning, and we will try to do this by mid-December, while also sharing with the main stakeholders of the NCP the peer review report, is that we will ask for the interested parties and stakeholders if they would be interested in having a session, much just like this one, on the OECD guidelines and on the OECD due diligence guidance, as well as the NCP, the Portuguese NCP activities and main responsibilities, in views of precisely promoting the engagement of the stakeholders. So this will cover as well small and medium enterprises, not the enterprises themselves, but probably enterprises associations.
Maybe Pedro Pinheiro, do you want to answer to the question regarding the activities with other NCPs, please?
Oh, yes, there is a Southern Europe network that is beginning to work. We have already had some meetings inside that network and outside with Spain in view to develop an online meeting organized by both countries to divulgate the guidelines.
Yes, yes.
Also, Italy appeared in such meeting. Unfortunately, some countries did not appear, but the meeting was on the last day of the WPRBC meetings in Paris. So some people were on the way home, so we didn't have the chance to speak with them.
Yes, but we are our special partner on this is really Spain. Yes, it is easier to talk with them, and as we share some common factors, we consider that it is a very good way to work with other NCP and to learn with them, because they have more experience than as NCP. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I don't know if we have a question also from Arnau here in the chat, so I'm gonna read it. How do you think the revision of the guidelines might have an influence on the involvement and compromise of government with the allocation of resources on NCPs, both financial and humans? And then also, he said, connected to Laura's question as well, I was wondering how relevant this government implication can be to encourage other governments to a more active involvement, and how that can influence transnational companies' behavior. For instance, whether they may tend to a higher compliance, or by the contrary, they might be left with an easier field to operate.
Lydia, if you don't mind, I would first try to reply to the first question. So
Okay.
Regarding to the revisions of the guidelines, I think one of the parts that actually made some changes is the second part, the implementation part of the guidelines and the expectations of the NCP. As Lydia said before, the new version sets out an expectation that all the NCPs must face peer review every 5 years. We can talk by our own personal experience on this peer review exercise. It was one of the best kickoffs for our work, because there was, and there still is, some major lack of experience from our NCP, and by being able to meet with other peers which are more experienced in a constructive view really helped us to draft a plan, a coherent plan on how to set out your institutional arrangements, your promotional activities, and better prepare for specific instances that might arise. So in this sense, the revision of the guidelines really is influencing the compromise also of the governments, because since it's not just the peer review, but there's also a follow-up on the recommendations that are made. So our NCP is expected by the end of the next year to say, okay, from the recommendations that you issued, we did this, we did that, we were not able to do this, and we probably will try to do. And this sets out an expectation that there will be some government involvement, because if there is not, it will be stated in the public report. I don't know if you want to add something else, Lydia.
No. About this, no. Regarding the governments and how they can encourage other governments to a more active involvement, it will be possible only through the bilateral agreements between the governments. So at European Union level, as you should know already, it is in negotiation the Cooperative Sustainability Directive for Enterprise, the CSTD, and through that instrument, we will see in the next years probably a lot of improvement on that regard. But the CSTD preview will have also impact in the third countries. But it will be necessary also the bilateral agreements between governments from, as example, from Portugal with other governments like Angola government or other governments. So it will be very important, and that in that agreement it should be clauses that oblige the fulfill of some requisites regarding on the guidelines for the RBC. It is very, very important, really, and this is a political issue. It's without political without the political concerns about it, it will not be possible to do much.
Thank you, Lydia and Pedro. I don't know if anyone, Rodrigo, has any other question. If not, maybe we can close the sessions. Rodrigo, yes.
Yes, there is.
Well, congrats for the great presentation. I mean, you can, Rodrigo, if you can ask directly if your microphone works.
I think not, because
Okay.
Rodrigo is typing again.
Okay,
so
okay, sorry. How does the question? How does Portuguese NCP manage the cases when companies ignore an NCP recommendation? Are there some specific sanctions, like the Canadian NCP example, in order to empower claimants?
Lydia, would you like to start, or?
You start if you want.
Okay.
Yes.
If you don't mind. So
No.
as you probably are aware, we have a lack of experience on the treatment of specific instances. So this specific team made by Lydia, Pedro Pinheiro, and me, we only started working on the NCP since 2020, and since that we didn't receive any specific instances for treatment. In fact, there is an history of one specific instance, if I'm not wrong, in 2004 or 2008, something like that. But as such, we don't have the experience to answer that. What I can tell you is that we will, with the update of the guidelines, there is also an expectancy of revising our rules of procedure, and with these rules of procedure, we will have an overview and go around not only the specific instance treatment steps that Pedro Pinheiro was talking about, but we will also be involving stakeholders, not only academia, but trade unions and business associations, as well as other areas of the government, especially when we are also talking about potential investments on foreign investment on enterprises. And what we wanted to try to do here is we don't really want to punish companies for not engaging, but we certainly wish to promote the companies that will show good faith on the treatment, while we are offering good offices on the treatment of specific instance. So what we want to do in partnership with ICEP is to find ways and mechanisms that we will be able to certainly promote these enterprises that show the good faith on the treatment of specific instances. Right now, we don't have rules of procedure yet drafted. We will be doing that with certainly with the help of the interested parties and stakeholders by the beginning of the next year. But certainly, this is in our mind. I hope I replied to that to your question. And Lydia, if you or Pedro, if you feel free to add something.
No, I only want to clarify that we already have rules of procedures, but we have to revise that rules of procedures. So, and this situation will be better treated through this revision. Pedro Pinheiro, I don't know if you want to...
No, I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
So, Rodrigo, I don't know if you are satisfied with our answer, but...
I can speak a little bit. I'm in
okay,
the 20th Forum of Business and Human Rights in Geneva, and I escaped from a session to be here, and it's a common area of work. I can speak so loud. So thank you for the answers, and like to transmit all my appreciation of this wonderful presentation. It was very interesting and brilliant. And sorry for my English mistakes. I'm working in Italian and French and Portuguese at the same time, and sometimes all these languages are mixing in my brain. So thank you for very much for the explanation.
Thank you. Yes, we thank you, really.
Well, I think maybe we can finish now. I also want to thank you so much for your time, for the presentation, and I'm sure it was also very informative for our students, and I know we'll be also in touch for future activities and collaborations. So maybe we can close up here. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.